Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. This podcast has evolved over the 5+ years since it first launched. From now on, I'm going to be talking about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. And also mindset, of course, but mindset of all kinds, not just business mindset. I think. Things are changing for me, as you may have noticed if you've been following me online or listening to this podcast, so anything goes here. I hope you stay along for the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today, and now let's get into this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 347. This is your host, Holly Worton, and I'm back with another solo episode. Today, I'm talking about self-forgiveness, how to forgive yourself, how to move on with life, and stop beating yourself up over past mistakes. Talk about things you might want to forgive yourself for. I made a quite extensive list here because I find myself still beating myself up over past mistakes and things that I don't like how I've handled them. And so I've made this kind of big list to help kind of trigger some memories of things that you might want to forgive yourself for. I talk about why self-forgiveness is so important. I talk about how to start forgiving yourself and practical things you can do today, but also how to turn this into an ongoing practice because we're constantly doing things and later realizing that we didn't really like the decisions that we made or how we handled situations, and our mind gremlins can kind of turn these situations into new sources of guilt and new things to beat ourselves up about. And so I think this is an ongoing process, like the mindset work that I keep talking about. We're constantly going to be doing things that our mind could use for good to learn from or for bad to beat ourselves up over. So let's start talking about things you might want to forgive yourself for. Past mistakes. I think we've all made decisions that we've regretted. We've all made decisions that we wish we could go back and change. However, I really think that not so much everything happens for a reason, but I think that everything happens. Like, we can learn something from everything that happens to us. And that might be the reason. Everything is a lesson. Everything is a learning opportunity. And I think rather than beating ourselves up over past mistakes and being angry with ourselves for making mistakes, we're always going to make mistakes. We're never going to be perfect. We're never going to get everything right. And so it makes much more sense to recognize the learning opportunities, forgive ourselves, and move on. I have certain things that I like awkward things that I've done like years ago that keep popping up into my mind. It's like my mind gremlins kind of like dig through the past and like everything that I've done and just kind of randomly bring things up into the light and remind me of them every once in a while. It doesn't happen a lot, but it's really annoying. Failures, and I say this in like air quotes because again, I think all failures are learning opportunities. And I talked about this in episode 341 about how you can kind of forgive yourself for these failures and learn from them. So in episode 341, I talk about the importance of failure and how to make the most of it. Because again, I think failure it's not a definite thing. It's not like, oh, you failed, now just give up everything. It's a learning opportunity. The same goes for things like regrets. And the things that we regret may be past things that we consider mistakes, failures, poor judgment calls, whatever it is, anything that you regret doing or things that you regret not doing. These are things that we can forgive ourselves for. And, you could spend your entire life lamenting your regrets and thinking about, oh, how much better my life would be if I had made that other decisions instead of this decision that I did make. But that's not going to get you anywhere. It's just going to make you feel bad about yourself. And, past mistakes, failures, regrets, bad decisions. I don't think there really is such a thing as a bad decision. Yes, some decisions lead to outcomes that we really didn't like, outcomes that we were not looking forward to, outcomes that we did not anticipate. But I don't think they're necessarily bad decisions because, again, they lead to learning opportunities. The same for missed opportunities. And I talked about this in episode 345, why we could all benefit from saying yes more often. And saying yes more often will help us to avoid missed opportunities. But even if you said no to something and later regretted it, and you see it as a missed opportunity, that's still not something to beat yourself up over. It's something to, and I talk you through this in that episode, to recognize, why did you say no? Why do you regret saying no? And how can you say yes in the future? It's all about turning it all around. Quitting. Sometimes we quit. Sometimes we quit jobs. Sometimes we quit relationships, friendships. Sometimes we quit our studies. Sometimes we quit all kinds of things. When I was walking this, I've just been reviewing my South Downs Way book because I'm releasing the second edition, hopefully April, maybe May. And there was a point where I almost quit the first time I walked that trail. And I didn't, and I'm glad that I didn't, but I almost did. And there's no shame in quitting because you can always go back and do it again or do something different. I quit my master's degree to start my first business. And that's something that I still haven't 100% come to terms with. I mean, I have maybe 98%. But there's a part of me that never really kind of got the closure from that experience. Like, I know it was the best decision for me, but so part of me thinks, oh, what if I just waited, a couple more months, finished it, and then moved on? I would have had that sense of closure. So I think that's just another thing I'm going to have to work on for myself. Because I absolutely do not regret having quit that program because I know it was the right thing. Changing your mind. Sometimes we commit to something and then we change our mind and, we go back on whatever it was that we planned or we make new plans. And sometimes that leads to disappointing other people. Sometimes it leads to disappointing ourselves. But that's another thing to forgive yourself for. Sometimes we don't evaluate things properly when we first make a decision, and then we think about it and we change our minds and we make a better decision. So even if that disappoints other people, that's still not something that we should be beating ourselves up for. It's definitely something to forgive yourself for. Failed goals. I mean, if I look back over my history of goal setting over the last few years, I have not met all of my goals, and that's okay. I mean, sometimes I set wildly unreasonable goals or didn't do the work I needed to do to achieve the goals, or circumstances happened and, it didn't happen. And I've spent a lot of time kind of beating myself up over that over the last few years. Why didn't I achieve my goals? And it got to the point where there was a brief period of time where I just didn't set goals because I didn't believe that I could achieve them, because I just wasn't achieving them. And kept doing the mindset work, kept doing the work, and things happened. I pivoted in my plans and my projects. I started setting goals that were more aligned with what I really wanted to be doing. And this year, things have been going really well. I mean, I mentioned this in an email to my list a couple weeks ago. And this year, it's like everything is coming together for me. But it's because I kept going and kept refining things and started setting better goals. So it's high time that I forgave myself for, and I think I have for the most part, my failed, and I say that again within air quotes, goals that I didn't achieve. Because, sometimes we just don't set the right goals for ourselves, even though we think they're the things that we want. Lost hopes or dreams. Sometimes we had, like, the house that I kept talking about. Not last year, but the year before. Was it? When was it? No, I think it was last year. Early last year and the year before. The house that I wanted to get in Avebury, that was a hope, that was a dream, and I lost it. But eventually I came to realize it was a good thing that we didn't get that house. I'm glad we didn't move. I'm glad we didn't get it. It wasn't the right thing for us at that time. But for a while, it really felt like a lost hope or dream. It was something that I really, really wanted for a long time, many, many months. And, it didn't happen. So, another thing to forgive yourself for, because sometimes we don't, like now in hindsight, I can look back and say, I'm really glad we didn't get that. But it's taken me several months to see that. For a long time, I couldn't see it. And I was just really, really disappointed and kind of mourning that loss. But again, that's not something to beat yourself up for. It is something to forgive yourself for. Other things to forgive yourself for: relationships. Things that you might consider to be failed relationships, mistakes you made in relationships. And this is all kinds of relationships, whether it's romantic relationships or friendships or family relationships. Forgive yourself for stuff that you've done in the past. And in terms of forgiveness for situations that involve other people, that aren't just internal things of yours, there are some other steps that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes that you might want to take. But it still serves no purpose to beat yourself up over things, decisions that you've made in relationships. I still have this situation from high school, like decades ago, that still kind of bothers me, that creeps into my mind. My mind gremlins, it's like one of those things that like digs up and it's like, remember this. And they kind of put it up in front of my face so I can see. And it's something I need to forgive myself for. I kind of have, but not 100%. And I know I haven't forgiven myself 100% because the mind gremlins keep bringing it up. So I think that's another sign that you need to forgive yourself for something. If your kind of the shitty part of your brain keeps bringing this stuff up for you to look at. Weaknesses, or things that you consider weaknesses, or areas that you need support in. Again, no one is perfect. No one has every single strength out there on the planet. No one is good at everything. We all have our strengths. We all have our weaknesses, or areas that are challenging to us. And that is absolutely not something that we should be beating ourselves up over. It's something that we should be recognizing and accepting and forgiving ourselves for. Other things to forgive yourselves for, things that you can't change. Especially when situations involve other people, we can only control, we can only change, we can only manage our side of the relationship, our side of the situation. We can't control how other people feel, how other people react, what other people do. So if you have situations from the past involving other people, and it's a situation that you can't change because of how the other person responded or reacted, forgive yourself for it, because you can't change what other people do or think or feel. And leading on from that, and talking about relationships, hurting others. Sometimes we say or do things that hurt other people, and you can't change that. You can't go back into the past and erase it, so it really serves no purpose to beat yourself up over it. I think all of these situations are kind of symbols of self-judgment and the way we judge ourselves for not performing perfectly or not behaving perfectly. And it does not serve us to continue to beat ourselves up for all of these things in the past, because we cannot go back into the past and we cannot change these things. So why is self-forgiveness so important? It's important because I think it's an important aspect of self-love. And self-love is really, in my opinion, kind of what we're all aiming for, is that happiness and joy that comes from fully accepting ourselves and loving ourselves. I think that self-forgiveness is a very important part of self-love. It leads to improved well-being. It leads to better decision-making, because when we learn from these past situations, it will help us to make better decisions for ourselves in the future. Self-forgiveness leads to happiness. It leads to release from these situations and healing from these situations. It leads to self-knowledge, because the more we evaluate these situations and really look at them rather than sweeping them under the rug and pretending that they don't exist, the more we'll know ourselves. And again, the better decisions we will make for ourselves for the future. And all of this just leads to personal growth and personal development. which leads to happiness and, a more fulfilling life. So self-forgiveness is really, really important, in my opinion. So how to forgive yourself so that you can move on with life, let go of the past, let go of the guilt. I think there are several things you can do, and not everything is going to work for everyone. But I think one of the steps is self-acceptance. And I think self-acceptance can be really, really challenging for us, but it can also be really, really a vital part of healing. So I think we need to stop and really look at the situation. So I would say go through the kind of list of things that I just gave you and write down in your journal or wherever any situations that you thought of when I was going through that. And really look at them and just accept yourself. Accept that you did these things. Accept that you responded in this way. Accept that you said these things because you did. And you can't go back and release it or erase it. You can't go back and delete it. So just really sit with it and see it for what it is. Because if you don't look at the situation for what it really is, then you're not going to be able to let go of it. Sweeping things under the rug is not a good way of dealing with things because your mind gremlins will pull them up for you to look at from time to time and serve them up to you as a reason or an excuse to beat yourself up, which is not good. So just, accept that you did these things. That to me is the first step, and really, really look at them. And I think making a list is the first place, because when you get something I say this all the time, when you get something out of your head and you put it on paper, in your journal or wherever, it makes it real, first of all, rather than this kind of murky thing that's been floating around in your head. But also oftentimes we realize it's not as bad as we thought it was. And again, it's in the past, it's done, it's gone. So all that's left is your memory and how you deal with that memory. So to me, the next step is learning. Like, what was the lesson in the situation? And I believe that all situations, no matter how painful or difficult or challenging, have a hidden lesson within. So look at what was the lesson. And if these situations that you're looking at are fairly new or happened not that long ago, sometimes it can be really difficult to find the lesson. Maybe talk to a friend and see if they can help you, or just put it aside and work on some of the other ones that are easier. I think oftentimes the further in the past these situations are, the easier it is to see the lesson, to see what you learned or what you could have learned from the situation. And it's never too late to learn from a situation. So maybe you won't learn the lesson until you sit down and map all this stuff out and look at it. So what's the lesson that you could have learned or can learn from these situations? And maybe, write a list in your journal and then dedicate one page to each thing so that you can really dig into it. And I would say, and I know this is kind of difficult, is do a little bit of gratitude work. And I know not everyone likes gratitude work. A lot of people really, really resist it. But for me, it can really turn around my perspective and my view of a certain situation. So you've looked at the situation, you've looked at the lesson. Now give gratitude for that lesson. Give thanks to yourself for having created that situation in your life so that you could learn whatever it is that you learned from that situation. Give gratitude for that lesson and give gratitude to yourself. And that could just be as simple as just writing a couple of sentences down in your journal. But I think that can be a really good shift to kind of shift from the guilt and the negative feelings into a more positive perspective. And oftentimes we have a lot of guilt around these things. So, we start out with the gratitude work, but part of forgiveness is letting go of that guilt. So one thing that I often mention is, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong because I always do, Ho'oponopono, which is a Hawaiian prayer forgiveness prayer. So I'm linking to an article that I always link to in the show notes, but it's basically a 4-step process where you say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And there are different versions of this. But essentially what you're doing with these steps is you're showing repentance by saying, I'm sorry. You ask forgiveness by saying, please forgive me. Give gratitude by saying thank you. And you show love by saying, I love you. And this is repentance, forgiveness from yourself, gratitude for yourself, for the situation, and love for yourself. And also, you can use this in a situation with another person and do this in relation to another person. But since what I'm talking about here is letting go of your own guilt and forgiving yourself, I gave that example as in terms of doing this exercise with yourself. But I think it can be really useful, and it's very, very simple, but I think it's a lot more powerful than you may think. But read the article, it's in the show notes, and you'll be able to see for yourself. Give it a try. I think just saying those words and kind of setting that intention can really help shift things. And it can really help you let go of guilt. So next, I talked about how some of these situations are internal situations, and some of these are situations that involve other people. So when you've got a situation from the past that involves another person, one step that's, I think, pretty important is to apologize. And if this person is still in your life, I would say definitely apologize to them. If it is relevant to do so, if this person is someone that you, again, still have in your life, continue to have in your life, and want to continue to have in your life, and if it's safe for you to do so. If this person is, for whatever reason, violent or dangerous, I would say keep your distance. So apologize in person, apologize in writing, apologize however is relevant to you. If for some reason the person is no longer in your life, or if it's not safe for you to apologize to them, or if you are currently in a situation of no contact, but yet you still kind of want to apologize for energetic reasons, then I would say write a letter to the person and then burn it, throw it away, or whatever, but don't send it to them. But I think even that act of writing a letter, even if that other person isn't going to see it, I think that can shift things energetically as well. So I think apologizing when another person is involved is very, very important, whether or not they actually know that you're apologizing. Again, many times it will be relevant for you to actually apologize to them. Sometimes it will not be. As always, stay safe. If a person is violent, don't rekindle connection or contact just to apologize. You can do that long distance without them actually knowing what you're doing. So I think that's really important. Another thing that's really useful that's popped into my mind, because I've been going through my business mindset books and I've just released Business Beliefs, is Psych K, the process that I worked with for years, has a relationship balance. And this is something that you learn in the advanced integration workshop. So if you've trained in Psych K, this is something you can do if you've done the advanced workshop. If not, you would want to find a facilitator. Contact me, I can recommend people to you. It's a really simple procedure that takes about a half an hour that can really shift relationship blocks and situations with other people. So I will mention that as well in the show notes. And then think about what would give you a sense of closure for the situation, whether it involves someone else or whether it's just an internal process that you need to forgive yourself for and let go of. Do a little ritual, light a candle, burn something safely. Do whatever you need to do to give yourself a sense of closure over this situation. But really set the intention that you've done the work to accept yourself, to learn from the situation, to give gratitude for the lessons, to forgive yourself, to apologize if that's necessary, and then be done with it. Case closed. This was something from the past, and you set the intention that you're not going to continue to beat yourself up over this, that you have forgiven yourself, you have done the work, you have learned the lesson, and now you're moving on with life. So give yourself that sense of closure. And then finally, I think it's never a bad idea to add a little step of self-care. So take care of yourself. So sometimes doing this work can kind of dig up even more stuff. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable. Sometimes it can be difficult or challenging. So do a little self-care something, whether it's like, again, lighting a nice candle or using some essential oils that smell pretty or taking a bath or something to kind of care for yourself, to recognize the fact that you've done some difficult work and that you're moving on and you're kind of not necessarily rewarding yourself, but caring for yourself and acknowledging the fact that you have done something that's been challenging. So I'm just going to run through those steps again. So the first step to me is self-acceptance, learning the lessons, giving gratitude for the lessons, letting go of guilt, apologizing to the other person if there's another person involved, having some kind of ritual of closure, and finally self-care. So that's pretty much it. I think this is a really useful process. So if you find yourself beating yourself up for anything from the past, whether it's mistakes, failures, relationships, whatever, go through this process. And as I said at the start, we're always going to be doing things that are going to trigger feelings of guilt, feelings of self-judgment. So you might want to turn this into an ongoing practice. Either set it up in your calendar as kind of a recurring event, or just be aware. And whenever something happens that you feel yourself starting to beat yourself up for, write it down in your journal and go through this process. Accept it, learn the lesson, give gratitude, let go of guilt, apologize if someone else was involved, create some kind of ritual of closure, and then self-care. And do what you need to do. Create an ongoing, recurring event in your calendar, or just do it on an as-needed basis, but find what works for you. But I think it is important to realize this is not just a one-and-done kind of thing. Things are constantly going to be happening that you might need to forgive yourself for or might want to forgive yourself for. So I think it's very important to turn this into an ongoing practice. And so we don't let this stuff accumulate, because if you kind of look at your life right now, you've probably got a huge list of things that you might want to forgive yourself for. So things have accumulated over your lifetime up until this point, but now is the time to kind of declutter and clear them out, and then just be aware of new stuff that happens in the future. So that is all for now. Please drop me a line. Let me know what you thought of this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollyworton.com or find me online and get in touch there. Thank you so much for listening, and remember to visit hollyworton.com/347 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollyworton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.